Hello Fleet, and welcome back to another episode of Captain's Academy with your instructor Chase. And in this particular episode, what I'll be doing is covering the changes made to the Captain skills after patch 0.4.0. Now, since the last video till now, there have been quite a few changes. Some skills have been moved around, some skills have been removed, and some new skills have been added. So what I'll be doing in this video is very similar to the previous video, which is what I'll be doing is going sort of row by row, and I'll sort of explain all the skills, and I'll also make recommendations as to what ships would ideally fit what particular kinds of skills. So without any further hesitation, let's get going. So let's take a look at the very first row of skills. There's 5 of them now, a significant increase than what was originally available in the last video. So the 5 skills, going from left to right, are Expert Loader, Basic Firing Training, Basics of Survivability, Situation Awareness, and Expert Rear Gunner. Now, the first skill here, Expert Loader, decreases the reload time by 30% when a shell is switched. But you have to look at that carefully. What it says is that only when the main battery guns are loaded, then when you switch, do you get that 30% reduction in reload time. My experience with the skill has been, it's not really that necessary, because with the way the game is right now, you might as well just fire the salvo that you've got loaded and then switch over, because the shells can actually do quite decent amounts of damage. The secondary armament skill, which is the basic firing training, is actually quite useful for pretty much all classes of ships except for destroyer. What they do is they reduce the reload time of the secondary guns with calibers up to 155mm, and they also increase AA efficiency by 10%. So pretty much this applies to battleships, cruisers, and aircraft carriers, although as a destroyer this skill isn't that useful. Ship survivability is an interesting one. The basics of survivability skill used to be not that useful, but the way that the game has gone now in terms of the amount of fire damage and how long fires last, this could be a very, very useful skill if you're on the larger ships like cruisers, carriers, and battleships. So if you're in those ships, you should definitely consider the skill, because it actually reduces your repair time for those things by 15%. And if you couple that with a module that also decreases fire extinguishing and recovery from flooding times, then you could get it down to, I think, minus 30%, which is quite significant. Now, I've kind of neglected destroyers up until this point, but if you're a destroyer and you're looking for a skill in the first line, get the situation awareness skill. This is a skill that allows you to get a notification that you have been spotted, which is that little exclamation point for those of you who aren't aware. So that skill basically helps, let's say if you're an American destroyer and you're sailing around and all of a sudden, you know, there's something around you that has spotted you, and anything that's stealthier than an American destroyer is usually a Japanese destroyer. So that's when you should be wary that there's something around you. So that situation awareness skill can be really, really helpful if you're playing destroyer, regardless if it's American or Japanese. It just helps to know exactly at what range you're being spotted at. The last skill here, which is the Expert Rear Gunner, is useful for carriers as well. So carriers actually have a choice between 3 different skills on the first row. The Expert Rear Gunner skill increases the efficiency of the defensive rear guns on bombers, so that includes dive bombers and torpedo bombers. Although truth be told, the bonus isn't huge, and I really haven't seen a massive amount of usage for that skill. I mean, it can occasionally, you can shoot down like one or a plane or so, but other than that, it's not awesome. But then again, any little bit helps when you're playing carriers, so you might want to offer a skill like this. The second row of skills comprises 4 different skills. There's Aiming Expert, there is Torpedo Armament Expertise, there is Fire Prevention, and the new skill Incoming Fire Alert. Now, Aiming Expert, which increases the speed at which you can turn your guns, is really, really a situational skill. Depends on what particular ship you're playing and which particular ship actually needs it. So take for example something like a Warspite, which has a 72-second turret traverse time, which is really slow. A lot of the mid-tier American battleships where the turret traverse speeds are like 60 seconds, or even something like the Grimyashi, which as a destroyer has really, really slow turning guns. This skill is really useful. On some other ships where the guns turn reasonably fast, this skill isn't really as useful, so you might want to think about skipping it. The next skill is Torpedo Armament Expertise. Now, Torpedo Armament Expertise is a very useful skill if you're playing destroyers or torpedo armed cruisers like the Japanese cruisers. They're also super useful for carriers because the 10% servicing time reduction to torpedo bombers means that you can get your torpedo bombers, sort of serviced and back out there faster, which means more damage. So this is a very, very good skill if you're in any sort of torpedo armed ship or carriers. The next skill is very interesting. This is fire prevention, which gives a 7% reduction to the chance of fire. Now, fire prevention in the current meta of the game, and I have to stress this, in the current meta of the game, with fire being as common as it is, can be a very, very useful skill because this combined with the module can reduce your chance of fire by 12%. But in the future, if they change fire, then this skill might not really have as big of a use and you might want to offer something else. So for now, this is a very useful skill on pretty much carriers, cruisers, or battleships. So if you're captaining one of those, you might want to offer something like this. And finally, the new skill, the incoming fire alert. The incoming fire alert basically says if you have a shell that's coming towards you that's more than 6 seconds worth of flight time, you'll get an alert saying that somebody's shooting at you. In my personal opinion, this is not really that useful of a skill unless you're new to the game and you're still unaware of things. As you get more experience of the game and you're constantly moving, you're constantly not sailing in straight lines and stuff, this is not that useful because you're already doing the things necessary to keep yourself safe. So instead of spending your skill points on this, you might want to spend it on either fire prevention or aiming expert, or, well, if you're in a torpedo ship or a carrier, you might want to get torpedo armament expertise instead. The third row of skills also is 4 skills. This includes high alert, there is vigilance, there is dogfighting expert, and the new skill superintendent. I am re-uploading this video because I made a mistake here in the previous one. High alert gives a 10% reduction to the damage control party, which is actually the repair skill. So this is a skill that is viable for all ships. It allows you to get that repair ability to repair modules and fires and flooding 10% faster. So pretty much all ships can get this skill. Thank you, viewers. Vigilance is an interesting captain skill now because torpedoes, I think, have had their detectability changed a little bit. So they're a little bit harder to detect now and they get a little bit closer than before. So if you're in a big slow battleship and you're really worried about torpedoes, you might want to opt to get the skill. But if you are a battleship captain that constantly changes directions and speeds and stuff like that, this skill, again, not as useful. It's kind of like the incoming shell alert thing at tier 2, the tier 2 skill here, except for torpedoes. Kind of useful, kind of not. Again, depends on the level that you have reached as a player. Dogfighting expert, really interesting skill for carriers because it's very dependent upon what particular planes you've got. You've got slower planes than the enemy, you benefit. You're faster than them, you don't benefit. So for the USN carriers, which they have sort of slower fighters initially, then faster fighters later on, it could be okay for the earlier stages, but not so useful later on. So again, kind of a thought-based, whether or not you want the skill or not. Alternative skills that work for carriers include the high alert or vigilance. Both of them can be useful. High alert giving your repair ability back faster, and vigilance allowing you to spot destroyer torpedoes a little bit earlier. On the other hand, if you're a Japanese carrier captain and you want your fighters to be a little bit better against the American ones, especially the late game, you might want to get this to make your fighters a little bit more competitive. But it's sort of situational, and as a carrier captain, you've really got to examine what kind of fighters and what their speeds are and how much of a boost you're going to get. Finally, you have Superintendent, which increases the number of charges for your consumables mounted to your ship. If you're in a battleship, cruiser, or destroyer, this is an absolute must-get because it increases your repair ability, your AA barrage, and your smoke screen by 1, giving you 3 charges instead of 2, something that is super, super, super useful. The 4th level skills, again, they've sort of made it almost 4 per row for every single skill. That's kind of cool. So there's 4 again in the 4th tier. There's Demolition Expert, there's Advanced Firing Training, there is Last Stand, and there is Aircraft Servicing Expert. Demolition Expert, which gives a 3% increase to the chance of fire, is pretty useful for the fast HE spamming cruisers. So Cleveland's, some of the Tier 8, Tier 9 USN cruisers, the Des Moines could benefit from this, or if you're, having USN destroyers with their guns and you're trying to let things, set things afire, this could be a really useful skill. Other things like battleships won't really see much benefit from a skill like that, so you might want to skip it. And again, carriers, this doesn't affect you at all because there is obviously one skill right there that's screaming carrier, click here. Now the Advanced Firing Training, really useful for USN cruisers, really useful for battleships, just to increase the range of, one, their secondary guns, and also increase the range of their AA guns. So this is a really, really useful skill. By the way, speaking of which, the Japanese cruisers can opt to get one of these two, so sort of pick one and kind of go with it, because they're both pretty good skills, although I'm still leaning more towards advanced firing training than this skill, because demolition expert 3% isn't that significant, but again, it's more for the ships that can spam shells. Last stand, super useful if you're in a destroyer. It means that when your engine or your steering gear gets knocked out, or receives critical damage according to the description, but from my knowledge, just getting knocked out, you're still able to have them operate, but at a penalty. So if you are losing your engine frequently, which happens to a lot of destroyers, this could be a really useful skill. And of course, the carrier one, self-explanatory, aircraft servicing expert, no question about it. The 5th level skills, where things kind of get a little bit interesting. You've got 5 skills here: last chance, you've got preventative maintenance, concealment expert, air supremacy, and jack of all trades. Now, last chance gives a reload buff to you when your ship is under 20% HP. So, think a Des Moines with lower HP. This could be an awesome skill because you're able to spam out your shells that much faster. Could also be useful in a battleship on battleship slugging fest. If your battleship gets knocked to below 20% HP, a 9% reload buff is going to allow you to even out the fight maybe a little bit faster. So this is a very interesting skill that you might want to think about. Destroyers could even benefit from this, especially the American destroyers, or the ones where the destroyers engage other destroyers. Could be a really useful skill. Preventative maintenance, a 34% reduction to the incapacitation of modules. This is one of those skills that I look at and I'm not really sure what it does and where it's going to be really useful, because I've really thought about this skill. I've really thought about where it might work, and really I can't think of anything. The other skills are significantly more useful than this one, so truth be told, I would pretty much skip this skill altogether. I just can't see where the module reduction, like the incapacitation module reduction, can really be useful, especially when compared to things like, I don't know, concealment expert, which reduces detectability for all ships. Now, destroyers really would love concealment expert, allow you to sort of be stealthier for longer periods of time. Cruisers, this could be a really useful skill, allow you to get closer. Battleships, still useful. Closer your range, the higher your chances of hitting stuff. Maybe catch people by surprise. Aircraft carriers, super interesting, because if you throw this skill along with the concealment modification that gives another 10% to, let's say, a Japanese carrier, you could take like a tier 8 Shokaku, which is a huge ship, sneak it within like 11 kilometers, and people still might not see you. So that's a really, really useful skill for almost every other ship class. So that's why I'm not really sure where preventative maintenance would be useful. Air supremacy. This is an interesting skill again for carriers. If you're a USN carrier and you like your dive bombers and you like your fighters, go for this skill. If you're in a Japanese carrier and using the balance configuration where you have fighters, you might want to think about it. Although still, if you go up against an American aircraft carrier with the same skill, I don't think you would win that duel. So something to think about. Although again, see, this is interesting. If you think about dogfighting expert with the slower high tier fighters, coupled with air supremacy, fighting a squadron of 6 from the USN side, who knows, maybe you would win. And of course, jack of all trades, 10% reduction to reload time of all consumables. I don't think this really requires much explanation. Your smoke, your A barrage, everything just 10% reduction. So this actually affects all mounted consumables, so that's also to your repairability and also to your scout planes. So I think jack of all trades can also be a very, very useful skill, and all of these skills I think are more useful than preventative maintenance, which, like I said, can't really see the purpose of it. So that's pretty much all I have to talk about in terms of commanders and captain skills. If you have any questions, please post them in the comment section below. Otherwise, I bid you an awesome day, and I will see you all on the high seas soon. Take care.